Hi everyone. So today I'd like to talk about binning and what it can do to help your astroimaging. So to start off, real quick, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is binning, and I'm not going to go into the full technical details. But if you want to take a look, there's a really nice article on ATIK cameras that talks about binning specifically and the differences between doing it with a CCD or the more modern CMOS cameras. But really, the idea here is you're lowering the resolution of your image, kind of taking it from 100% to 50%. But in that process, when you do that, you're counting if a pixel landed on one, or a photon landed on one of these 4 pixels, it gets counted as one in that super pixel that gets made when you downsample it. And on the surface, that doesn't sound like much, but it has kind of a mathematical benefit similar to when you stack images together, where the noise gets reduced. So it ends up increasing your signal to noise ratio, similarly to the way that stacking increases your signal to noise ratio. So when you do this, there are trade-offs involved. Like I said, first and foremost, you're shrinking your image by doing it. So a lot of people will say, I don't like to bin because I'm losing resolution. Maybe instead of a 20 megapixel image, now I've got a 10 megapixel image. And they go, well, I bought a 20 megapixel camera. And there's definitely valid arguments for that, but especially if you're shooting through a slower telescope, or you've got limited time to gather your data, or you're using something like narrowband filters that already have a much reduced signal coming in because of the filter in front. Sometimes you're just looking for anything you can do to increase that signal to noise. Also, if you're going after something very faint, looking for ways to increase that signal is important. So all that sounds great on paper. But I've been kind of fighting it for a while now, where I really like being able to have this very large image, and I feel like, well, I'll just shoot longer instead of trying to do binning. And I don't know, a lot of people would talk about how CCD binning was the right way to go, and with CMOS, did it still make sense or not? And so finally I decided to just kind of test it and play around with it with my latest image. So let's take a look together and see what we can see. So this is an image of the Orion Nebula that I took with narrowband filters, so and hydrogen alpha, sulfur, and oxygen filters. And this is actually a mosaic. It's a 2-panel mosaic, and I'll get into how I personally feel the binning and the mosaicing works together in a nice way here in a little bit. But this is just to give you an idea of, off the bat, combining it all together, what I'm getting out of it. And we'll return to this in a minute as a comparison point. I haven't done any color correction on this yet. It's not my final image. This is just kind of stitching the 2 panels of the mosaic together and applying an auto stretch. See, I'll even just click auto stretch again. No difference here. So let's look at the beginning points of this. So just looking at, in this case, it's the hydrogen alpha filter. So these were 5-minute long exposures. This is the stack of them, and I believe I did about 15 images per channel. So, a little over, I think, an hour and a half-ish. My math's probably wrong, but back of the envelope, about an hour and a half-ish for each of these filter sets. So looking at it in general, and this is with just the normal screen stretch put on there, looks great. Lots of detail out here. I actually did a shorter exposure time that I'll combine with this at another time. Maybe I'll do a separate video on that. So I'm not too worried about this being, saturated out here. I was more concerned about all of this other kind of dust coming out on the outside. So I feel like I've got a decent amount of data here. That's not too bad. But especially when I go to look at some of the other ones, I still have data. In this case, this is the S2, but it is a lot noisier, right? It's, with that, in order to stretch it to get to this point, pulling out a lot less signal in my noise there. And with the O3, similar kind of thing, right? I can kind of make out some wispy differences here, but certainly nowhere near as much as I'm seeing on the other ones, while the core obviously still has a lot of signal to it. So what can I do here? What are the effects of binning? So as I said before, binning is really no different than essentially shrinking your image and just making sure that in that kind of super pixel format, the photons kind of get combined together. And in this case, once the image is actually taken, each photon is whatever the value is of that pixel. So you can actually just use in PixInsight, it's called integer resample. In Photoshop or other ones, you can do image size or resample, things like that, and just taking it down by a factor. So resample factor of 2 on down is that what we would call binning 2 by 2. So you've got your 1 pixel, each pixel going across. If it's at its full resolution, we call that 1 by 1 binning. And just means the full resolution. 2 by 2 is you downsample it by that factor of 2, so 4 pixels in a square become 1 pixel going forward. So we're just going to go ahead and drop this down. So you can see immediately that's really what it is. It shrank the image down. But I can easily kind of hit one button to essentially zoom into it to the same kind of level that it was at. And right now it's still got that same auto stretch that was on it before. We don't necessarily see much of a difference. But when I click the auto stretch again, it'll recalculate, and it's looking for those background values and the peak values. And if my signal to noise has improved or changed, then that should force a new kind of auto stretch when I hit that button. So let's see what happens. If you can tell, some of the brighter areas got a little bit brighter in the stretch, and some of the darker areas got darker. That's kind of what you would want, right? If you're talking about did light come in or not at the basic level, 1 or 0, you would want the stuff closer to 1 to start getting brighter and the stuff closer to 0 to start getting darker. So it definitely did make a difference, and some of this stuff here started coming out a little bit more. Let's do it one more time for what would be called 4 by 4 binning. So now taking those original pixels, 4 of them turned into 1. Now I'm going to take 4 of those and turn them into 1. So I'm effectively, cutting my image down to 1/4 of the original size. And once I do that, and I hit the auto stretch, once again, the brights seem to get a little brighter in this kind of middle area, and the darker seem to get darker. For me now, I'm starting to really notice more in some of these faint areas, and it's kind of hard to just jump back and forth on this. But what I did here in my testing is I combined my narrowband images together and then did them at kind of the different bin levels. So let's take a look at what that really ended up looking like. So first, this is just binned 1 by 1, right? And this is the color data. This is one panel of my mosaic. And it looks good. Nothing wrong with the 1 by 1. And I can see, kind of this dust lane in here, this dust lane in here, that kind of thing. I can see all of that. If I do my auto stretch on it, nothing changes. It's been auto stretched. So now with that first round of resample at a 2 to take it to binning 2 by 2, here we go. And so what I can see on here as a difference is in this kind of area, that kind of semi-dim area, right? There's brightness to it, but it's not blown way out like a lot of the rest of this. Between this image and that image, this definitely feels brighter. And part of that is because the blue in here that I did on my channel combine, if I look at the blue channel, I'm looking at my O3 data, and my O3 data, which I believe is this, you could tell originally that was where it was pretty faint, right? But I did have a lot of blue in this area, and so you can tell that blue definitely got a nice big increase there. Now, taking that a factor further and going here, if I'm looking across, jumping between them, what I really start to notice, other than certain things definitely seem brighter, like if I look at this dust lane here, here, and here, this definitely seems to have more contrast in it, more signal difference between the background than it did in the other ones. But where this also pops out, especially for narrowband images, right, is, once again, each one of these narrowband frames is being assigned to a color channel. So in the case of my O3 or my S2 data, which S2 would be going to my red channel, the more I can increase that signal to noise, then the more red is going to start contributing in here on just a quick auto stretch level. So between each of these, I notice I go from a lot more greenish hue to getting a little bit more yellow or orange, a little bit more of that red contribution coming in here. And it can be, fairly gradual kind of looking between these, but when I put them both over each other and I just kind of hold down to swap between them, you can really see how that difference impacted this kind of outer edge of it and the color inside here, right? I'm going, it's almost like everything overall kind of just brightens up a little bit, and then the color starts to get really different. So the other thing that I wanted to show, and I'll do that by kind of zooming in a bit down here, is, I probably went a little too far, this kind of area here, this kind of cloudy, it's got kind of a ridge to it, it's kind of faint. If I put this at the same zoom, not only does this stand out more, but you can also tell the color's very different, right? This is just kind of almost a little bit, it's just a little bit different shade of green with a notch in there. Here it definitely stands out as kind of a red-orange feature on the side there, right? And moving this into the core kind of area, this outer edge here, comparing the 1x1 to the 4, you can really start seeing some of the difference in the colors. And part of that isn't purely just color, but it's the contribution of that S data. And so that sulfur data, it moves in a slightly different way inside the nebula, right? It has slightly different detail. So, that contribution, not only just the color difference, but the fact that there is more detail in that gives more depth to all of this here as well. Similar kind of thing with the O2 data contributing in also. So it just adds more variation in there. And that variation is really what's going to make the final image pop. Now, as I said, you are sacrificing something, right? These two images, even though they're sized the same on the screen, are very, very different. This is a 20 megapixel image. This is probably the equivalent of an 8 megapixel or so image. So what is the effect on that? So this would be considered the 1x1 level here. So the full scale of that resolution. This is considered the 1x1. So you can see the size difference there. So, but let me bring this in so that they're the same. Okay, so, 1:1 here is 4:1 on this one. And you can kind of start telling here, it may be hard on YouTube, so I'll take it in 2 more levels on this side, 1 more on this one. So they're about, sorry, there we go. Now they're the same size. Look at the difference in the stars here. This star has basically just turned into a block, right? This one has a little bit more shape to it. This one has a little bit more shape to it, but they're essentially just a few pixels wide now versus being wide enough to be nice and round. So when looking at these, you're really seeing that difference in resolution there. And this is where a lot of people will get hung up on not wanting to sacrifice anything on their image, and I get you. If I was looking at this versus this, if this was my full astro photo, I would hands down want to take this one over this one. But am I really going to be looking at my image at that scale, right? If I were to take this one and try to make it sized to my whole display here, how much of my image am I actually looking at that scale at 2:1? Not much, right? If I actually, even at 1:1, am I looking at my whole image here? No, but I'm getting closer. Here we go. This is closer. This has just about my whole image in here. So at that 1:2 level that I'm looking at. So if I'm zooming in, if I'm dropping this down by half just to get to this point of, it filling the whole screen, then, what's the difference if I was looking at that on the other one? So let's do the same thing with this one here. Stretch it out to the whole screen. And obviously this is a pixelated mess, but let's start bringing this out now. So once again, once I'm at that same kind of level where it's doing the whole thing, can I tell that some of these stars are just squares? Not really. Let me bring it in one here. Can I tell now? Maybe if I'm really trying, bring it in now. Now I'm starting to notice that these are a little pixelated here. But it really isn't until I get to be about here that it starts to become distracting that they're like that. And so I'm not going to have this image at anywhere near this resolution. It's probably going to be more like this resolution. Now maybe it might even be more like this one, in which case maybe, this is a 4x4. This is pretty aggressive. Maybe the 2x2 would be a little bit more pleasing. So those are the trade-offs that you need to think about. But as you can tell, once I'm zoomed out here, you can't tell anything about the stars being any different, right? I mean, this just looks like a nice smooth image, and I haven't even done noise reduction on this yet, right? So a lot of times the form factor of how big are you really going to be looking at this image, can kind of allow you to make those trade-offs on things like resolution when you do your binning. So there's one added piece to this for me, which is the fact that I was doing this as a mosaic. I wanted to be shooting with my main scope, and I couldn't quite fit the field of Orion in the way that I wanted to take it in there. So what do I do with this? So I made a mosaic with it, and what I did was I saved off my different panels. So I had one for this side, and I had one for this side here. And I saved them both off at the full 1x1 binning, and then composited them together and then brought them back in. So for that, I'm using the Microsoft ICE program, and I've mentioned that on a video earlier, but it just allows you to quickly and easily kind of stitch these images together with very little, if any, kind of seams brought in. And one of the things that I also was testing is I still wanted to do things like my noise reduction and stuff on the whole mosaic. I didn't want to do it after the fact. But I still was hoping that I could do that with ICE. And so one of the tests I did was doing just that. I saved off my original images as TIFFs and then brought them into ICE. So let's take a look at how that looks. So I've got my two panels here. They're not stretched, so they're damn near just black as far as the basic look of them, with just a little bit of the core of Orion in there. So I put them both in there, go to stitch. Let's see how it does on trying to align these together. In general, now granted, it still looks dark. I can't really tell much, but it looks like they were able to line them up. I don't see any big jagged pieces. And it's doing that pretty much because of the dots in the stars, right? It's able to kind of match up enough of those to line them up. So then we go into the crop phase. I normally just say auto crop with something like this, so it just gets kind of the edges where they didn't quite line up together. And then I've got my final image here. and then I can just export it as a TIFF again. And you can see it's taken the two images together. Now I've got a 29 megapixel image that's pretty wide on that. And then I export it to the disk. Now, once I've done that, I can then bring it in. And that's what this was, coming right in. And so coming in, once again, this is basically what it looked like in ICE. The auto stretch, there we go. And so zooming in to where those panels kind of met, which was right in this area here, looks like it did a really good job of bringing them together without any big obvious seams or anything. And that's fantastic, because that means everything here is still in a linear state. Now, they're all 16-bit TIFFs instead of 32-bit, which is what PixInsight uses natively. But for at least for me, for this so far, it seems like 16-bit's doing plenty well for me. So now I've got my main kind of image here. Well, great. Now maybe I can go ahead and do that same binning across the whole thing. So as we mentioned before, this is 2 panels. So now it's 2 images wide in terms of resolution. Do I really need all of that? Now that this has been blown up so big, and I'm not planning on making this a poster size thing on the wall, it's going to be on this monitor or on an iPad basically. Well, I can sacrifice a lot of resolution if I get, color quality and detail overall out of it. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to bring up my integer resample again, just leaving it at 2, and I'm going to just go ahead and do it twice. So there's 1, and there's 2. I made it a lot smaller overall here, but let's put these on some, kind of the same scale. This is the 1x1 original. And then this one here is now 4x4 binned. Now I haven't adjusted the auto stretch level, so they should look almost identical, right? And right now they do kind of seem almost identical. Now if I bring this in 2-to-1 on this and this up to the same level, they still seem pretty good to me. Bring it in another 2 here to match up to 1 there. So now, I'm maybe just barely starting to see a pixel, right? So, okay, great. So now that it's just starting to look at that, let's do that same quick kind of look again. How big is that for my monitor? That's way more than what I've got. I mean, honestly, at best, maybe I'd want to run it about this size. Well, once again, I'm zoomed out far enough I can't see a pixel. So this size is actually a great size for me. So I actually feel pretty good about the pixelation part of it. So now, if I feel good about that, what about the kind of color and detail difference? Well, for that, we just select and let's do another auto stretch. And what I can tell right when that happened was the color in the background changed a lot, right? It's no longer just talking about, did I get more blue in here, which I did? Did I get more kind of red, orange in here, which I did? I also got a lot more color variation between the greens, reds, and yellows in all of this background, because that, once again, that S2, which is, present in here along with that hydrogen, just a lot more detail, a lot more signal came out in that. Those areas that we talked about before over here really kind of stand out more now. Another one is there's a little bit of an orange area in here that has a lot more to it as well. I'll bring it in here so we can kind of see them. So this one here and this one here, these kind of orangey star areas here just are jumping out a little bit more, and looking over here at part of the Running Man, this was just kind of green ooze at this point, and now it's got more variation in it, more kind of yellow, orange kind of look in there. So there's just more to what's going on in here. And yeah, I sacrificed some resolution, but it's a 2-panel mosaic. It was going to be a big file already. So sacrificing that resolution really doesn't hurt me so much but I gain so much more in that color variation. And when I go into my later stages of processing, where I'm trying to say, how do I want to balance the reds of the sulfur with the greens of the hydrogen and the blues of the oxygen, doing that kind of color balancing or color shifting, the biggest thing that will help you in that is variation in the color at the beginning, because that gives you more to work with. And so I really, in this background especially, I just have Hulk green in the background, right? That's all I've got. But here I've got color difference. I've got color variation, and that just gives me more and more room to play with when I get to the end of the day. And so last thing on here, I'm going to go ahead and just run quick noise reduction process on each of these. I'm actually going to run the same settings and values on both. And then we're going to see if we can really tell a difference between these here. They haven't been final stretched yet, haven't been final processed, but we're just talking about the base level with an auto stretch and the basic kind of noise reduction done on them. This one's almost done. There we go. So on this one, bring this guy up here. This is the 1:1, the full resolution of the two panel mosaic. And it looks good. The noise reduction did a great job. Things look nice and smooth on this. I've got lots of detail. It looks great, although it is a little bit dominated by that hydrogen data. So now let's take a look at the same one in kind of a more finished state there. Same kind of size. And yep, there we go. Same basic size. And let's look at it here. Does it feel pixelated to me? No, not at all. Does it look same kind of smoothness in general with that noise reduction? Yeah, I think it does. It may not be exact. It's pretty close though. I don't feel a lot of difference in that noise reduction there. But yeah, it looks good to me. But now, like I said, I've got way more variation in color, a lot more info to work with on all the levels here as I go in. And that's really what, to me, makes it worthwhile for this particular image. Each image will vary. If you're shooting just the core of Orion here and all of it's really bright, binning probably isn't going to make a difference to you. But if, like me, you're wanting to get an image that has that fainter detail in it, then binning can be a really important thing. And at the end of the day, you may not use it for your detail. You may not use it for your luminance. You may just bin the color data so that you can get more color out of it as a more advanced technique. Or in my case, you could just be using it to shrink down that overall mosaic, because you're probably going to shrink it anyways. May as well shrink it down at the beginning so you get a signal to noise benefit out of it. And that's really it for today. Just kind of diving into one specific topic here of binning and how you can use that to improve your images, especially when you're doing something like a mosaic. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that encourages you guys to try out and play around and test some of these new things. And until next time, I wish everybody clear skies. Thanks.